Thanks, Dave. Thank you, all of you. What a great opportunity this has been to reconnect with some old friends and some new ones and be properly embarrassed. But again, thank you so much to the board and the staff of Disability Advocates for this recognition, and to all of you for supporting such a great organization. And congratulations to Disability Advocates for 30 years of serving people with disabilities in Kent County. You should be very proud. Before I look forward, I find myself reflecting on the past a bit. When the Grand Rapids Center for Independent Living got its start, something called the Independent Living Movement was of just a few years old. A movement of empowerment, choice, and self-determination. A movement that said, nothing about us without us. In the 1970s, a man named Ed Roberts, who was a polio survivor, wanted to attend the University of California at Berkeley. He had two problems. He was a quadriplegic with an iron lung and at a place that would not accommodate him. The story goes from him attending, of course, after suing to attend, graduating, founding the country's first Center for Independent Living, and becoming California's director of the Department of Rehabilitation. Ed Roberts talked about his experience shortly after he contracted polio and how he wanted to die, and he stopped eating. He writes, "My last special duty nurse left, and the next day, I decided I wanted to live. You see, that was a big turning point. Up until then, these nurses were available and doing things for me round the clock. I didn't have to make any decisions for myself because they were always there. When they all finally left, that's when I realized that I could have a life, despite what everybody was saying. I could make choices, and that was freedom. And I started to eat again." This is one of the fundamental principles of the independent living movement, choice. We use the lessons that we learned from our sisters in the women's movement and our friends in the civil rights movement. We advocated for accessible housing, transportation, public buildings. We worked with people with disabilities who wanted to move out of nursing homes and group homes, and we helped them find their voice. We went to Lansing and to Washington to help legislators understand that our voices needed to be at the table, and that full inclusion wasn't about dropping people with disabilities in the middle of a classroom and hoping they'd succeed. It was about giving us the tools and the supports to succeed, and it worked. We convinced the Congress and the President that we needed a civil rights law in order to achieve our full potential, and the Americans with Disability Act was passed. I was there that day in Washington, in the halls of Congress, where there were TV sets up monitoring the vote, hundreds of people with disabilities, all kinds of disabilities, waiting to hear the final vote, and then drowning out all else with our cheers of victory. I'll never forget it. The ADA was the result of many, many years of hard work and advocacy on behalf of and by people with disabilities. This work dates back as far as 1935, when the League for the Physically Handicapped in New York City was formed to protest discrimination by the WPA. The Home Relief Bureau of New York City stamped all applications with a PH, which stood for physically handicapped. Members of the League held a sit-in, this was 1935, at the Home Relief Bureau for 9 days, and a weekend sit-in at the WPA headquarters. These actions led to the creation of 1,500 jobs in New York City for people with disabilities. But laws can't regulate ignorance, hate, or prejudice. They can help. They can put it in your face and give us a chance to prove who we are and what we can do. And that's really what Disability Advocates is all about, helping people with disabilities to develop the skills they need to live their lives and advocate for themselves. In closing, I'd like to tell you two personal stories, one from the past to illustrate where we've been, and one from weeks ago that illustrates where I hope we're going. 30 years ago, and saying that makes me feel very old, 30 years ago, in the same year that DAC was found, I was a grad student at Michigan State University. I was required to do a practicum placement in social work at an agency or an organization. The first organization that MSU and I chose here in Grand Rapids refused to take me because of my disability. I won't mention who they were, but they felt it wasn't fair for the clients to be counseled by somebody who was not like them. I ended up working for Catholic Social Services, and by the way, I'm not Catholic. So fast forward to several weeks ago at Art Prize. I was going through downtown with 3 young friends and their mom. We were having lunch, and I was trying my best to engage them in conversation that didn't result in yes and no. When I learned that my 9-year-old friend Asher had a classmate in his Forest Hills school who used a wheelchair. Of course, this information was volunteered by his mother, who was trying to keep the conversation going. So I said, "Well, did you tell her that you have a friend who uses a wheelchair?" Matter-of-factly, he said, "Well, no."